Welcome back to the Acceptance Project podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Bryan Gross. I want to start today with a question. Have you ever had someone in your life who seemed to keep score of your failures better than your successes? Somebody who always found a way to remind you of the things you did wrong, the goals you didn't finish, or maybe the weight you gained, or the ways you somehow didn't quite measure up. Sometimes it happens in quiet little comments that stay with you long after the conversation ends, and sometimes it happens right after you finally make a good decision for yourself, only to hear a voice say, "Yeah, but you never stick with anything anyway." And what is strange is sometimes these comments don't come from enemies. They come from people close to us, people who are supposed to support us. At least that is what I thought. So take a few minutes to sit down and relax while we figure out what to do about this so-called friend. I'm going to need your advice as well. So today, let's slow things down together and spend a little time talking honestly about the people in our lives who should care about us more than they sometimes do, especially when that person is us. Today I want to talk about somebody in my life who has been pretty brutal to me over the years. Somebody who constantly points out my shortcomings. Someone who always reminds me of old failures at the exact moment I'm trying to do better. Somebody who notices every flaw, every insecurity, and every pound gained. Every goal I failed to follow through on, every moment I did not live up to my own expectations. And honestly, there have been moments when I've wondered, why even keep this person around? So today, let's talk about that friend. Let's talk about that friend who tears us down when nobody else is listening, why we allow them to be so cruel to us, but would never tolerate them being such a bully to others. And somewhere in all of this, maybe we can learn how to stop giving that person permission to have such a hold on our lives. Maybe by now you've figured out that this horrible friend that most of us have is actually ourselves. Most of us are walking around every day carrying a bully in our pocket, and the bully sounds exactly like us. You know, it's funny how protective we become of other people. If a friend came to us crying because somebody called them lazy, unattractive, stupid, weak, or hopeless, most of us would immediately comfort them. We would say things like, "Well, that's not true." We would encourage them. We would remind them of their strengths. We would probably get angry at whoever hurt them. But then we look into our own bathroom mirror in the morning and maybe start our day with these horrible reminders of how we have failed. Ugh, you never stick with anything. You always mess things up. You're getting heavier. You should be farther along in life by now. And somehow we accept this treatment from ourselves in ways we would never tolerate from another human being. Last week I got up early one morning to go to the gym. My bed was negotiating with me like there had been a hostage takeover. It kept reminding me that it was cold and dark outside. The flannel sheets were so much warmer. And when that didn't work, it started reminding me that my back hurts and I would feel so much better if I just laid in bed for a few more hours, and then I would feel like going to the gym. But I got up anyway. I drove to the gym anyway. I was actually proud of myself. Not because I suddenly transformed into that gym rat I always fantasize about being. No, I was proud because I'd made a good decision. And before I could even celebrate that decision, that voice showed up. "You always do this for a few days and quit." And there it was again, that friend, that critic, that running commentary. And the sad thing is, I believed it for a moment. Because when criticism comes from inside your own head long enough, it stops sounding like an opinion and starts sounding like the truth. So today I want to explore 3 ways we beat ourselves up, why we do it, and how we can begin changing that relationship with ourselves. The first way we beat ourselves up is by turning our mistakes into identities. We don't say, "I failed." We say, "I'm a failure." There's a huge psychological difference between behavior and identity, but we blur the line constantly. If you forgot to pay a bill, suddenly you're irresponsible. If you gained weight, suddenly you're undisciplined. If a relationship ended, suddenly you are unlovable. We take temporary moments and carve them into permanent labels. And honestly, I think part of why we do this is because the human brain likes certainty. Labels feel neat. They feel organized. The brain loves categories, but life is messier than labels. A bad moment is not a bad life. A setback is not a permanent address. One chapter is not the entire book. Imagine if we treated children this way while they were learning to walk. The first time a toddler falls down, we would throw our hands up and say, "Well, I guess you're not a walker. Tiny Tim is never going to walk." No, we would never do that. We understand falling is part of learning. But adults, well, we expect ourselves to perform perfectly while learning new habits, healing from old wounds, balancing stress, paying bills, surviving heartbreak, carrying trauma, and functioning on 4 hours of sleep and one emotional support taco. And then we wonder why we struggle. One way to stop turning mistakes into identities is to change our language. Instead of, "I'm a failure," try, "I experienced a failure." Instead of, "I am weak," "I'm struggling right now." Language matters because words build emotional architecture. Some words become prisons, and others become doors. The second way we beat ourselves up is by talking to ourselves in ways we would never speak to another person. And this one hits hard. Think about the things you say to yourself during your worst moments. Now imagine saying those exact things to somebody you love. Imagine your friend tells you they gained weight and you respond, "Well, you couldn't expect that you wouldn't gain weight if you were filling your mouth with all this garbage food you're always eating. Go have another cookie." Imagine somebody says that they're trying to improve their life and you say, "You'll quit in a week. You always start out with these big dreams and give up on them in a day or so. Go ahead, start a new goal so everyone can laugh when you fell again." These things would be cruel. That would be emotionally abusive. But inside our own minds, we normalize it. Why? Well, partly because many of us learn that criticism equals motivation. Somewhere along the way, we absorbed the idea that if you are hard enough on ourselves, maybe we'll finally become better. But shame is a terrible long term motivator. It burns for a hot moment and then leaves emotional ash everywhere. Now, self compassion, on the other hand, actually creates resilience. Research in psychology consistently shows that people who practice self compassion are more likely to recover from setbacks, maintain healthy habits, and persist through challenges, not because they lower standards, but because they stop wasting energy attacking themselves. You can't heal in an environment where you are constantly under attack, even if the attack is coming from your own thoughts. Self compassion is one of those things people often misunderstand. They imagine it means letting yourself off the hook, becoming lazy, or pretending everything is fine when it's not. But real self compassion is not weakness, it's emotional first aid. It's the difference between tending a wound and repeatedly poking it with a stick to build character. Practicing self compassion starts with awareness. Most of us don't even notice how brutal our inner dialogues has become because we've heard it for years. One powerful exercise is simply asking, "Would I say this to somebody I love?" If the answer is no, your brain has probably normalized cruelty toward yourself. Physical acts matter too. Sleep, nutrition, movement, boundaries, rest, and asking for help are all forms of self compassion. Sometimes compassion looks poetic and reflective, and sometimes it looks like drinking water, taking your medication, or finally answering the email you've been avoiding for 6 days while pretending future you is somehow a superhero. Another huge part is recognizing common humanity. People often think, "I'm the only one struggling like this." Well, but suffering isolates people by convincing them they are uniquely flawed. In reality, most everyone is carrying something invisible. The polished coworker, the funny friend, the professor, the parent, the person posting inspirational sunrise photos while eating shredded cheese over the sink at midnight. Being human can be complicated. One simple daily practice when you notice self criticism is to pause and ask, "What do I need right now instead of punishment?" Sometimes the answer is accountability. Maybe it's rest, or maybe it's encouragement. Or it could just be that you need connection. Self compassion is not about avoiding responsibility, it's about refusing to become your own bully while trying to grow. And believe it or not, people often become stronger when they stop treating themselves like enemies. I once heard someone say the mind is like a house, and some of us have allowed a very angry tenant to move into the upstairs bedroom rent free. Every morning they lean out the window and begin yelling insults while we're just trying to make coffee. "You're behind in life. You look terrible. You should have accomplished more by now." And somehow we just nod and continue buttering our toast. At some point, we have to decide it's time to serve up a conviction notice. One strategy that can help is something psychologists call externalization. Instead of automatically accepting every thought as truth, separate yourself from the thought. I'm having the thought that I'm a failure. You're no longer the thought, you are observing the thought. Thoughts are not always facts. Sometimes thoughts are emotional graffiti that have been sprayed across the walls of our minds like difficult seasons by what feels like an angry juvenile who hasn't gotten their way. The third way we beat up ourselves is by only measuring ourselves against perfection. We rarely give ourselves credit for progress. We only focus on the distance left to go. You lose 5 pounds, but you obsess over the 20 remaining. You go to the gym once, but criticize yourself for not going consistently for 6 months. You survive something painful, but shame yourself for not healing faster. And social media has turned comparison into an Olympic sport. Everybody online seems happier, thinner, wealthier, more productive, more successful, more organized, and more emotionally stable, and apparently capable of preparing dinners for their families that would make even Martha Stewart envious. And I'm over here feeling proud when I find matching socks. The truth is, we compare our behind the scenes footage to everybody else's highlight reel. And perfectionism keeps moving the finish line. Even when we accomplish something, the mind says, yes, but it should have happened sooner. That becomes exhausting. Healing begins when we start honoring progress instead of demanding perfection. One walk matters. One healthy choice matters. One good day matters. Small choices repeated over time become identity shifts. Not overnight, not dramatically, but quietly. The sunrise doesn't happen instantly. It happens slowly. It's like an old cat that slowly slips into the room and finds a nice warm spot to rest. And that's how it is with changing our own behaviors. We slowly make choices each day until eventually we've adopted a new way of life. It arrived quietly and eventually settled in as a permanent resident. I want to share a story with you about a friend of mine. I've changed their name at their own request, but they felt like their story was worth sharing. There was a woman named Carol who used to believe change had to arrive like lightning. She imagined dramatic speeches, life changing revelations, and movie moments with inspiring music playing in the background. But her life did not change that way. Oddly enough, it started changing because of a sock drawer. One evening, she came home exhausted from work, opened her dresser drawer, and it exploded into chaos. Socks were tangled together, receipts were crammed into the corners, and somewhere in the middle of it all was a soy sauce packet she had absolutely no explanation for. She sat on the floor staring at the mess and suddenly realized the drawer felt a lot like her life: overwhelmed, disorganized, stuffed so full that one small movement caused everything to spill out at once. Years earlier, Carol would have responded by declaring a complete reinvention. She would have promised herself a new diet, a new routine, a new schedule, and probably a whole new personality by Tuesday morning. But this time, she was simply too tired for dramatic promises. So instead, she picked up one sock and folded it, and then another, and then another. 20 minutes later, the drawer was organized. It didn't solve her problems, it didn't magically erase her stress. But the next morning, when she opened the drawer, she noticed something surprising. She felt calmer, not transformed, just lighter somehow. The next day, she made her bed before leaving for work. Not perfectly, just enough that it no longer looked like a wild animal had spent the night fighting invisible enemies beneath the blankets. A few days later, she started taking short walks after dinner. 10 minutes at first, sometimes less if Mother Nature had decided to water her garden that evening. Then she started drinking more water. She began going to bed a little earlier. Once a week, she cooked an actual meal instead of surviving on whatever she could microwave in under 3 minutes. The changes were small enough that most people around her never noticed them. No one applauded. No one handed her a medal for folding laundry and staying hydrated. But Carol noticed, because slowly her life stopped feeling like something happening to her and started feeling more like something she was participating in again. And that's the strange thing about change. People think transformation begins with confidence, but most of the time it begins with evidence. Evidence that you can keep one small promise to yourself, then another, and then another. Months later, a friend asked her what finally caused her life to turn around. Carol thought about it for a moment and laughed and said, "Well, honestly, I just got tired of living like I was waiting for someone to come rescue me." And maybe that is what so many people are doing, waiting for motivation, waiting for certainty, waiting for the perfect Monday morning when suddenly everything feels easier. But life rarely changes that way. Most of the time, change slips quietly into ordinary moments: a folded sock, a short walk, maybe even a glass of water, a decision to try again one more time. And eventually, those tiny choices begin stacking together, not into a perfect life, but into a sturdier one. Because acceptance is not pretending everything is perfect. Acceptance is creating enough compassion inside yourself that growth becomes possible. One of the great ironies in life is that many of the people who are hardest on themselves are also the most compassionate toward others. They give grace freely, encourage everyone else, and see beauty in broken people, except themselves. And maybe today is the day you finally offer yourself the same kindness you hand out to everybody else like free Halloween candy, because you deserve it too. Now, as we close today, I want you to think about the voice you hear most often in your own life. For most people, it's their own. So ask yourself this question: if your inner voice became a real person standing beside you every day, would you feel supported by them or wounded by them? And if the answer is wounded, maybe it's time to change the conversation. Not overnight, not perfectly, but intentionally. One thought at a time, one moment at a time, maybe even one act of grace at a time. Because the truth is, healing rarely arrives like fireworks exploding across the sky. Most of the time, it shows up quietly like a porch light left on for you when you thought nobody noticed you were struggling. It begins when you stop speaking to yourself like an enemy and start speaking to yourself like someone worth saving. You have survived too much to spend the rest of your life becoming your own bully. So maybe this week, when that critical voice starts whispering old failures and old fears, you answer back a little differently. Maybe you remind yourself that growth is messy, progress is uneven, and being human was never supposed to require perfection. So, if today's episode resonated with you, I would love to hear from you. Have you ever struggled with your inner critic? What are some ways you have learned to be kinder to yourself? Share your thoughts, stories, or reflections with us, because sometimes hearing someone else say, "Me too," can loosen the grip of shame in ways silence never could. And if you know someone who is constantly battling themselves internally, send them this episode. Sometimes the person smiling the biggest in public is privately fighting the harshest war inside their own mind. And don't forget to give us a share, a like, or a review. It always helps to grow this message and our community of listeners a few people at a time. And just remember, you cannot build confidence by constantly destroying yourself. Growth does not come from humiliation. Healing does not grow well in shame. Speak to yourself like somebody worth saving, because you are. So until next time, take care of yourself and take care of those around you. The Acceptance Project podcast is a production of Bridging Success, LLC. To learn more about the podcast and our work, please visit bridgingsuccess.com. This podcast and its contents are for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only. I'm Dr. Bryan Gross, but I'm not a licensed therapist. The topics and opinions shared by me and any guests are our own and should not replace professional or medical advice. If you're seeking mental health support, medical guidance, or help with personal matters, please reach out to a licensed professional who can provide the individual support you need.